Star Wars. It's a franchise so monolithic that it set the standard for what movies could be when it first graced theaters. You know the term blockbuster? Well, it arose from the throngs of people that queued up to see the original in 1977, with lines literally stretching around the block. No one had ever seen anything like it, and to this day the story of Luke Skywalker and his companions continues to captivate audiences around the world. Hell, with Episode 7 on the way, a whole generation is about to be exposed to the magic of Star Wars, showcasing its importance and longevity. With any brand this massive in its cultural influence, there were bound to be other forms of media to accompany the movies: toys, books, comics, and, of course, video games. I mean, who wouldn't want to blast TIE fighters in an X-Wing or swing a lightsaber around? That sounds amazing. Over the years, there's been some great Star Wars video games, titles that explored content related to the movies, and others that journeyed through time to see what the rest of this expansive universe had to offer. But one title sat in between movies, giving my childish mind the chance to become further acquainted with a galaxy I'd just fallen in love with. Released in 1996, Shadows of the Empire was the first Star Wars game fans could get their hands on for Nintendo's latest console, the N64. In fact, it was one of the earliest games released on the system, helping to usher in a new generation of gaming. It put you in the space boots of Dash Rendar, a roguelike no-nonsense mercenary in the mold of Han Solo. He's one of those characters you can't help but like for their heroic feats of badassery and snappy, arrogant dialogue, even if the similarities are a little heavy-handed. Despite this relative closeness in character design, that doesn't stop Shadows of the Empire from being a unique experience, and that's derived primarily from the narrative, as most of the game's events are set in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Taking control of Dash, the overarching premise of the game is to help Luke and the Rebellion. First, you must track down Boba Fett in an effort to rescue Han before he's handed over to Jabba the Hutt. Once this questline is completed, you continue to aid Luke in his efforts to stop Prince Xizor, the rich and powerful mastermind behind one of the galaxy's largest crime syndicates. Also, he's captured Leia, and he's working for the Empire. Imagine that. This gives the game a focus unlike that of most Star Wars titles, which, while in-universe, sat in their own time frame, a compact bubble in space somewhat isolated from the source material. And that's totally fine, not everything has to be so directly tied in with the movies. Yet Shadows of the Empire, especially at the time it was released, was wholly new in the way it connected directly to the original films whilst creating its own tale. And as a child who grew up watching the original trilogy on VHS and falling in love with that story, the ability to learn more about what happened in the time skips between movies and acted out via a new exciting character was too alluring to ignore. With a year between the events of Empire and Jedi, there was always that question of what was Luke doing in that time? Just training, or was there more to it? And regardless of the expanded universe's unfortunate yet necessary demise in the past year or so, this game was at one point canon, giving us a glimpse into the void left between films. As a huge Star Wars fan, this was way too cool to pass up. And sure, I more than likely would have filled that hole with my own story, but actually getting one where I got to participate in this untold tale? Pretty unbeatable, and it will always be a part of my canon. Let's get into the game though. Visually, we're looking at a title that is grand in its scope, much like its overarching setting of space, with environments that are vast, challenging, and varied. As Dash, you venture from the snowy confines of Hoth to the expansive, dangerous canyons of an Imperial-occupied moon. All the game's worlds are right at home in the Star Wars universe and have a certain movie-like feel to them. Jumping between moving platforms as they speed through the wreckage of a massive junkyard planet just feels Star Wars-y. And sure, there's plenty of imagery that tells you it's Star Wars, but there's an indescribable feeling of adventure present in Shadows of the Empire. Whether that's coming from their connection to movies that are etched in my mind, or the simple fact that space is a kaleidoscope of possibilities, I can't really say. Either way though, I love it. Yet, seeing as it was a launch window title for the N64, it falls a bit short. With such massively huge and impressive worlds comes a price. This might fit the feeling of Star Wars, but you can only use the N64's inability to render at further distances to your advantage for so long. Likewise, for the sake of creating expansive worlds, what textural detail you could have starts to get lost, making the longest and biggest levels a bit boring despite the large amount of exploration open to you. Overall, I do think it would be slightly unfair to slate it too much considering that it was an early title during gaming's awkward transition into 3D. Yet, this is a game that I think would look absolutely brilliant with a remake. Star Wars is a fantastic universe, with its worlds one of the highlights. Seeing such a grand swath of environments completely overhauled would be absolutely glorious. And yes, I know it's wishful thinking to ask for a remake, but I'm gonna ask anyway, damn it. You can't stop me. Anyway, when Star Wars gets brought up, what, or rather who, gets pulled into the discussion? 1. John Williams. Music is essential in tying together the films, with its powerful themes and subtle motifs layered within many different tracks. Shadows of the Empire, while not able to conjure up the same potency, complements songs from the films with freshly orchestrated tracks, helping to immerse you into each section of the game and give it more of that Star Wars feel. However, John Williams didn't write any of the new songs for the game. Instead, he recommended a good friend for the job. Composed by Joel McNeely in cooperation with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, it's one of the few games on the N64 to feature a completely orchestral soundtrack. And I think this still helps it stand out from the crowd. If you're blazing a trail through an Imperial starship, blasting stormtroopers around every corner, the synthesized sound of tunes from other games of the time just wouldn't fit. Instead, we've got banging drums, beautiful strings, and that ever-present and wonderful French horn. It's grandiose, it's epic, and it's Star Wars, making it a treat to romp our way from level to level when we have such great tracks on loop. Now, if only that romp controlled a bit better. Dash, for all his swagger and skill, controls poorly. His movement, while at a comfortable and reasonable speed, is quite slippery, meaning you'll probably have some difficulty at first with basic actions like running around a corner. In fact, you might momentarily become good friends with a wall instead. The crux of this slipperiness really does come down to the lack of simple turning ability. Oftentimes, if you want to completely turn around, you have to pretty much come full stop, in which case you're just going to get shot to pieces. Likewise, jumping has a nice floatiness to it that provides a window for player mistakes, but, much like running, it pays the price with its lack of precise control. In fact, once you're airborne, you have little to no control, so hopefully you've made the right jump in the first place. Again, hopefully. Dash's main form of combat is via his blaster, which not only has a traditional laser form, so to speak, but also a decent range of supplementary weapons that can be discovered in any of the game's stages. You'll just have to do a little exploration to get them. What's noteworthy here is that ammunition-based additions aside, the main blaster is instead reliant upon a cooldown system, where the more rapidly you fire, the more you'll burn through any available firepower. This mechanic is unique in how it doesn't require any ammo for your main and ever-present weapon, yet still doesn't allow you to fire wantonly for fear of having no firepower at your disposal. Jet Force Gemini did something similar with its primary pistol a couple of years later, and seeing as they're both third-person shooters, I'd like to believe little ol' Rare got some inspiration from Star Wars beyond anything subtle. Dash's main blaster is also unique in that it automatically locks onto targets, even if they're quite far away. The N64 controller and all of its one analog stick goodness doesn't have that great of capabilities when it comes to precise aiming. The aforementioned Jet Force Gemini proved this somewhat. Shadows of the Empire smartly allows for less intensive aiming through this lock-on process, and I'd like to imagine the developers already saw the troubles one might have and thought ahead by creating this mechanic. How true that may be is totally speculation on my part though. That doesn't change the fact that enemies will at times sit above or below you, meaning you must either get on their level, literally, or aim, in which case a holding of the Z button and a move of the analog stick to size up your firing line works surprisingly well. Without the need to aim too precisely, the focus centers around Dash's sight. Point him in the right direction, and it's happy blasting. At the end of the day, Shadows of the Empire has its flaws, namely centered around some semi-poor controls, but it's hard to fault a game too much for being ambitious even when it doesn't quite hit the mark. Rendering distances be damned, the scope of the levels you roam through are impressive in their scale. Not to mention a wholly unique story created for the sole purpose of expanding the story provided by the movies? On premise alone, that's an exciting route to take for any piece of media, but as a Star Wars fan, it was hard to contain the enthusiasm, especially seeing as I was just a kid at the time. Now, I don't want to overstate this. Innovative as it may be, particularly in regards to its expansion of pre-existing content, Shadows of the Empire is essentially a well-written fan fiction, allowing Star Wars fans to explore a universe they hold near and dear. As a result, it certainly isn't for everyone. While it isn't too reliant upon the players having explicit knowledge of the movies, problems in other areas of the game might not be enough for a fresh face trying to enjoy a story that delves into such a huge universe. In fact, although I still love it and have gone back to it periodically over the years, to be brutally honest, Shadows of the Empire is mediocre. A game with vast potential, but unless you're a diehard Star Wars fan, it'd be tough to go back and play it. Contextually, it arrived at just the right moment, helping to not only propel my love of Star Wars to even greater heights, but to highlight just what a Star Wars game could be. While future titles set in this universe would in fact receive far greater praise and push gaming even further, I'd like to think that they wouldn't have gotten there without games like Shadows of the Empire paving the way. And for all the great experiences I've had using the Force and wielding a lightsaber and making friends with wonderful characters, I'll be eternally grateful for how it inspired both me and my love for adventure.